It's the amazing Rico Brogna podcast with your host, Evan Roberts.
Here we are for a very exciting edition of Rico Brogna, a we just got kicked in the balls edition of Rico Brogna. Hey, we're in a time warp. It's 2019 edition of Rico Brogna. New York Mets on the West Coast against the Arizona Diamondbacks showed guts. They came back in a game that felt like they were dead man walking. They fight all the way back. They have a 5-4 lead. They managed to get outs from Huascar Brazaban and Danny Young and Phil Maton and then Edwin Diaz. Edwin Diaz reminded us of who he's been of the past. Edwin Diaz came into this game, and I have no issue with Carlos Mendoza putting his chips into the middle of the table, 2 outs, 8th inning, saying, hey, he's my best freaking reliever. I know he failed on Sunday against the Padres, but this team is going nowhere without this guy, so I'm going to go to him with the tying run on first base with 2 outs. And I'm going to take the chance that Edwin Diaz isn't going to melt down like he did earlier this season, like he did 5 years ago, and like he did on Sunday against the Padres. And what we all witnessed, ladies and gentlemen, is why we're fucked. Let's start there. It's why we're screwed. This team is going nowhere, absolutely nowhere, if the former top closer in baseball is going to suck the way he did tonight or last night, depending on when you're listening, or what he did on Sunday. Edwin Diaz comes in and on 4 goddamn pitches walks Pavin Smith. Did we not all see the handwriting on the wall right after that? He walks Pavin Smith on 4 pitches. He walks Gerardo Padroma. And then Corbin Carroll, who's been a beast now for what, a month and a half? Hoff would know better. That's his fantasy player. That's his guy. Throws an 0-1 pitch that Corbin Carroll hits the absolute bejesus out of, and let's be honest, puts us out of our misery. And maybe it's the emotion of blowing a lead in the 8th inning. Maybe it's the emotion of the worst loss of the year. Maybe it's the emotion of Edwin Diaz reminding us of who he used to be. But we're done. We're not going anywhere. Let's be perfectly honest about that. The Braves never lose. They're too many games behind the Padres. They're too many big games behind the Diamondbacks. And they're not winning when their closer gives games away. They can't afford this. Most teams can't, by the way. And certainly the Mets can't. But Edwin Diaz is on the mound with a chance to win a baseball game. Everything else that happened in this game, the Mets were set up to beat the Diamondbacks, to win this series, to win the season series, and to survive another night in which the Minnesota Twins no-show, and survive another night where the Atlanta Braves win. And what we got is the crap we saw 5 years ago from Edwin Diaz, an absolute meltdown. I think what's ending up happening is that 2022, 2 years ago, that's the fart in the wind. That's the anomaly when it comes to Edwin Diaz. So for all those years where we turned on him and we didn't trust him, and then he had this great comeback because of the trumpets and we loved it, and oh, he's so great and he's dominant. We all cried when he ripped up his leg last year in the World Baseball Classic. This is the disaster train wreck that ruined 2019. And this season is 2019. I mean, tell me the freaking difference. It's the same year. And for most Met fans, if you ask them, hey, what do you remember from 2019? What's the answer? The answer is they had a great comeback against the Nationals in the middle of August. The answer is they finished above 500 and they missed the playoffs, which is rare in Met history. Usually we just suck. Usually we're just not even in a pennant race. But in 2019, if you recall, they had their pinnacle moment at Citi Field in a weekend against the Nationals, much like the Mets had their pinnacle moment this season, a weekend against the Atlanta Braves before that all went to the shits. And they had brutal losses all season long. And I know that maybe we forgot a little bit about it because May was so long ago. But this kind of loss is the difference between being 4 games behind the Atlanta Braves and being tied with the Atlanta Braves. You can't lose games like this. I'm sorry. And look, there are other things we'll get into, including how this podcast almost didn't happen tonight or this morning. We'll get into all the other things. But here's the simple reality. Very simple. You have your best reliever on the mound. You have a 1-run lead. You are facing the bottom of the order, and all he needs to do is record 1 out to at least just get it to the 9th inning. And with your best pitcher on the mound, you lost. We lost. We all lost. And that's the second time this has happened in 3 games. And that cannot happen. That can't happen when you're chasing a team that never loses. That can't happen, period, when you're in a pennant race. Can't happen. And it's happened twice. Edwin Diaz, I don't want to say blew the game on Sunday, because the truth is Jose Butto blew the game on Sunday. But on Sunday, they lose a game with their best relievers on the mound, and they lose a game on Wednesday with their best reliever on the mound. But it's tough to imagine that Edwin Diaz, coming off of the Jackson Merrill home run on Sunday and coming off whatever you want to call this, back-to-back walks and a grand slam. And great, he got the final out of the 8th inning. Let's have a party. It's tough to imagine he's going to bounce back from this, because he didn't bounce back from Sunday. And this team is not good enough to overcome Edwin Diaz being the guy he was 5 years ago. Most teams wouldn't be. This team isn't. Especially because, and Hoff, you tell me, are we going to get an update on Dednel Nunez? Because that made no sense. And I want to make this clear about Dednel Nunez and Jose Butto not being used, which we'll get into. That's not the difference necessarily in this game. The difference in this game is that the closer failed. Like, at some point, Edwin Diaz was going to come into this game and have to get big outs. And if it wasn't going to be the 8th inning, Nunez was available, or they used Jose Butto, who clearly wasn't available, it was going to be the 9th inning. And the odds are he was going to fail then. So while I'm concerned about Nunez, and we all have questions about the non-usage of Dednel Nunez, this game was lost because of Edwin Diaz, and this game would have been lost by Edwin Diaz. Good morning, Pete Hoffman. How are you?
Hey, how you feeling, bud?
How am I feeling? Listen, before we continue, here's how I'm feeling. So I fell asleep too, believe it or not. At about 9 o'clock, I put one of my kids to sleep. And while putting him to sleep, I fell asleep. It happens. I woke up at 10:35. Not the end of the world, about 45 minutes late for the game, but my scorebook was all ready. I'm on DVR, and I'd say by the 6th inning, I was able to catch up. Like, right after the Mets actually came back and took the lead, I was all caught up. So I see Pete Hoffman texting me, "Hey, have you live?" I write him back, "Yeah, I'm good now, good to go." Never heard back from him. Meanwhile, he passed out. So I passed out prior to the game. I was able to recover. Hoff passed out in the middle of the game. This game ends. The Met world is on fire. And I'm like, holy crap, I don't think we can do a Rico tonight. I'm calling Pete. I'm also hoping that there's no emergency, because I'd feel like a real jackass if there's like a real emergency and I'm harassing Pete Hoffman. Especially it's a few days after I got mocked that I announced to the world, if Juan Soto signed on Christmas, me and you are Ricoing on Christmas Eve. And everybody thought I was an ogre. But Hoff fell asleep. Luckily, he woke up, and here you are. So wait a second. Let me get this straight. You woke up to find out the Mets blew this game? Good morning.
I just saw the Corbin Carroll grand slam just now. I can't believe what just happened. I mean, I fell asleep. The Mets were winning. I couldn't believe my eyes. I saw Daniel Vogelback get his 88th home run of the season, according to SNY. I was so excited. This was unbelievable. This is, By the way, I do have an update for Dednel Nunez. DeComo tweeted, Mets reliever Dednel Nunez was unavailable tonight because he's not recovering well between outings per Carlos Mendoza. It's unclear if he'll need another IL stint. That's not good.
Gee, I mean, think about it. Dednel Nunez pitched on Saturday, okay? And he looked great. He looked great on Saturday. Looked fantastic on Saturday. I think we all put him right back into the circle of trust. Understand why he doesn't pitch Sunday. Makes sense. They don't play Monday. He doesn't pitch yesterday. So when Dednell Nunez doesn't come into this game, I think the first warning sign was Reed Garrett. When Reed Garrett came into the game, replacing Danny Young with a runner on first and 1 out in the 7th inning, that was the sign of, oh, crap, is everything okay? So that's not good because it's been 3 days. It's also not good because the Mets have been pitching short an arm. I guess they're not really short an arm because remember, Paul Blackburn was placed on the injured list, so they had an extra bullpen arm. So I guess technically they've been pitching with a regular amount of arms until they make the call for Tyler McGill. But that's not good. That's not good. Dednell Nunez comes back, pitches really well for one game, and here he is feeling tightness in his forearm. So that's a terrible sign. And it's not surprising because I think if you're watching this game and you see Luis Severino, I'll get to him in a few minutes, and you see the way Mendy's managing the bullpen with Brazoban, who actually did a decent job, with Danny Young. But then really once he goes to Reed Garrett, who pitched the night before and has certainly not been all that impressive over the last few months, you started to, kind of raise the antenna and say, what the hell is going on? I'm not surprised about Budo. He did throw a lot of pitches on Sunday, and we see the way they treat him. 2 days wasn't going to be enough after throwing 39 pitches on Sunday afternoon. So I'm not surprised Budo wasn't available, but certainly the antennas were up with the way Mendy handled this bullpen. And I'll check the email. I'll go through it. I honestly didn't have an issue with the way Mendy handled this bullpen. Sometimes I come on here, I turn the microphone on, and I bitch and whine about Carlos Mendoza, and I nitpick Carlos Mendoza. I got to be perfectly frank with you. On the heels of this loss, watching this entire game, I did not have a problem with his bullpen management. I'd be a hypocrite if I said I did. I actually really like the way he managed this game. Luis Severino runs into the problems that he ran into. Really, when he gave up that base hit, I'm sorry, not the base hit because he actually fielded it. The ball that went off of him in the 3rd inning. At this point, it's 1-0 Arizona. He gave up the RBI single to Luis Guillorme. I mean, you can't make that crap up. I mean, jeez. Luis Guillorme has played for more teams than he's had hits this season, and he puts together a 9-pitch at-bat with 2 on and 2 out in the 2nd and pokes one to left field. Of course he does. Of course he does, to give Arizona the 1-0 lead. But the real turning point early in this game was when Severino gets that comebacker. It bounces off of his leg. He recovers to get the out, but he's in considerable pain. Stays in the game, thank God. I don't know what the hell they would have done if he has to come out in the 3rd inning. It's part of the problem not having a real long man in this bullpen. And right away gives up a base hit to Jake McCarthy, who drove me nuts all night, Jake McCarthy. This is for me and maybe a few other people. His walk-up music is Kurt Angle's theme song, which is funny because I put my oldest son to sleep to WrestleMania 19 because he wanted to see Kurt Angle against Brock Lesnar. And every time Jake McCarthy's coming up, I'm hearing Kurt Angle's theme song. I don't know how many people picked up on that, but I'm hearing that theme song all night because right after Carroll at the Grand Slam, you hear the theme song. But anyhow, it looked like Sevy, at least in the short term, was affected by that ball going off of his foot. His velocity on his fastball was down. They pointed it out on the broadcast. It was sitting at about 93, 94. He gives up the base hit to McCarthy. He gives up an absolute shot to Jock Peterson. And that's on the heels of the Mets, I think, getting screwed on that instant replay where McCarthy steals second base, goes back, misses second base then, and then goes to 3rd on the throwing error by Alvarez. I thought the Mets had it. I thought when the Mets issued the challenge, because McCarthy went kind of back towards the right side of second base, that they were going to be able to get that one. Turns out to not be the case, and I think the next pitch is when Jock Peterson hit the 2-run home run. But to Sevy's credit, I guess I'll give him a little bit of credit. He got through the 3rd inning. He got through the 4th outside of giving up an absolute bomb to Corbin Carroll. And then it looked like he was going to get through the 5th, and I appreciated Mendy pushing him. His pitch count was in the high 80s. This is not a very deep bullpen, especially if you're Mendoza and you know Dednell Nunez is not available and you know Jose Budo isn't available. And he got the first 2 outs in the 5th inning. He gives up that double to Gurriel, and I was with Mendy taking him out at that point, thinking, all right, I pushed him as far as I could push him. He goes to Brazoban, Again, not knowing, not us realizing that two of his best relievers are just flat out not going to be available. Brazoban does a fairly good job, gets 3 guys out in a row, the last out of the 5th, the 2 outs in the 6th. And as soon as he puts a guy on base, when he walks Perdomo, Mendy takes him out. Goes to Danny Young with all these lefties coming up. Again, I have no issue with this. Danny Young gets a couple of outs. As soon as he puts Jock Peterson on base, when Peterson's bluffing the bunt, he gets him out of the game. As soon as he put a guy on base, gets him out of the game. Now he goes to Reed Garrett. I'm certainly confused by that. But again, now knowing Nunez isn't available, where the hell else is he going? I mean, think about it. You want to go to Ryan Stanek? You want to go to Phil Maton in that spot in the 7th inning? I guess you could. That'd be the only argument. You want to go to Phil Maton. But Garrett got the job done. He got the job done because he picked off Jock Peterson, and then he struck out Josh Bell. And then Maton, he goes to him in the 8th inning, issues the leadoff walk, but gets the next 2 guys out. And when Mendy says, screw it, I'm going to Diaz, I'd have a problem with it. Anyhow, let me see. I'm going to go to the email right now, see if anyone's bitching about Carlos Mendoza. All right, Jimmy Kearney. Mendoza does this often. I think you'll disagree with this, but I'm not a fan of bringing your circle of trust relievers in mid-innings to clean up messes unless absolutely necessary. Historically, that's what closers did. Not anymore. Mostly, they're called on to pitch a clean inning. We saw it with Budo a few weeks ago when he had his first bad outing. He brought Budo in the middle of the 7th instead of letting him start the inning. In that situation, I'm not asking Edwin Diaz for a multi-inning save, not with a lead, not after Diaz just came off a brutal blown save. I'm not calling him. Sometimes you have to allow your bullpen to give up a hit and work around it. I disagree. I don't know what to tell you. Like, Edwin Diaz has mostly pitched well outside of the blow up on Sunday. You're telling me because of the blow up on Sunday, when he gave up the home run to, what's his name? To Jackson Merrill, that's enough to say I can't use him aggressively the way Buck used him aggressively 2 years ago, the way you would want to use your closer aggressively. And Phil Maton, yes, he got the next 2 outs. Suarez didn't miss a 2-run home run by much. Hit the ball pretty well to right field. I don't have a problem with that. I mean, I know it's easy to say it now because Diaz blew up, but I thought Mendy managed the bullpen perfectly. Guys failed, specifically the best player. Now, I don't want to forget the offense. The offense, and I know this is going to be a rip job a little bit, but whatever. This team lost. They're 4 games out now. Yes, they showed a lot of poise fighting back in the 5th inning. They're down 4-0. Eduardo Rodriguez is pitching a perfect game through 4. We all thought the game was over. I mean, anybody who's watching this game probably thought to themselves, maybe I should go to sleep. If I don't go to sleep, I'm going to watch this in a daze. I know they're not coming back. It's one of those days. They're going to lose this game. Hopefully they win the series on Thursday afternoon. And the Mets surprised us. Nimmo had the really good at-bat, drew the walk. J.D. Martinez hit a ball. It should have been a 2-run home run, but in this ballpark, went for an RBI double. They get a really clutch hit by Alvarez. It's going to be forgotten about. He's behind 0-2. They're down 4-1. That base hit to give him the second run and make it a 4-2 game. And obviously, Harrison Bader Vogelback hits the 2-run home run. And what Hoff is referencing before, and what I'm referencing now, if you didn't catch it, is when Bader hits the 2-run home run right after to tie it, the graphic that pops up and says Harrison Bader 2-run home run also showed Daniel Vogelback grand slam, his 88th home run of the season. How that comes up as a graphic, I have no idea. Was someone playing a joke on us? Maybe. Was someone screwing around saying, who the hell's watching this game? Let's have fun with the poor jackasses watching Mets Diamondbacks at midnight? Maybe. But yeah, we all picked up on it, or at least I picked up on it. Hoff picked up on it. I would assume a lot of people did. But if you didn't, go back if you DVR and go back to the Bader home run. But when Bader hits that home run, I mean, we're all ecstatic. What a great comeback. And the offense showed you a lot. They get the run the following inning with Starling Marte's legs, the bunt hit, the stolen base. But the offense did nothing outside of that. For 7 out of 9 innings, this offense played peekaboo again. So I know that's not the number one rip job, and that's why it took me 20 minutes into the podcast to say it. Obviously, it's Edwin Diaz number 1. It's the bullpen implosion number 1. But let's just call it like it is. They showed a lot of fight scoring the 4 runs in the 5th inning and the Marte run in the 6th inning. They did dick outside of that. Let's just be honest.
And I don't disagree, but I'm gonna counter with this. When your team puts up 5 runs, you should be able to win the game with the quote-unquote bullpen the Mets have. They should be able to, especially in a comeback form, they should be able to win that type of game. And they did. They came back. They were down 4-0. They put up 5 runs, and that should be enough.
It should be enough, but you're also asking, and again, ask any human being when Severino comes out of this game in the 5th inning. The Mets have a 1-run lead. It wasn't a 1-run lead at the time. It was actually a tie game, but just pretend you have a 1-run lead and you need to get 13 outs from the bullpen. Who the hell thinks the Mets are getting 13 outs from their bullpen protecting a 1-run lead? Because that's really what they were trying to do. That's why even in the 8th inning, when Starling Marte came through with another hit, he had that double into the corner, and Brandon Nimmo came up. I'm saying to the TV, they got to get this run home. Like, they're not, I didn't think they were protecting a 1-run lead and successfully getting the 13 outs they were going to need to get to win that baseball game. Now, they almost did, sure. 2 outs in the 8th inning. Edwin Diaz on the mound. They were 4 outs away. If you want to say they were close, fine. They were relatively close, but they needed to score more runs, and they didn't. And it's been a part of why they're in the position they're in. It's not the main reason. You're right. Bullpen could have protected the lead. 5 runs is usually enough, but let's not ignore that outside of that 5th inning, and this has happened a lot recently, the offense completely no-showed.
Well, I have a question, a follow-up to you about the bullpen, because the fact that Dednell Nunez is going to go on the IL, they've been doing this way too often. Harrison Bader had an issue for a little bit where he was basically a bench player. He was sitting on the bench. He was hurt. They couldn't play him because he was hurt, but they were waiting to get him in the lineup, waiting to see if he can get back in the lineup sooner or later. Like, what are they waiting for with Nunez? Not saying that it was good, and there's a better solution from the minors for a call-up, but what are they waiting for? If he can't recover, why are we waiting so long?
I think their thought would be this. Like I said, because Blackburn's on the IL, they've actually pitched with an extra reliever until they have to add their starter, which will be Friday and Tyler McGill in the White Sox series. And then, by the way, you're almost at September 1st. And so you can add the extra pitcher then. They're holding out hope they weren't going to have to put him on the IL. Like, once you put him on the IL, that's 15 days. That's 15 days. So I think the reason why the Mets have been patient, and they may remain patient with Dednell Nunez, is A, he's that good, and B, they don't want to just put him on the injured list. But think about this. All right, so Dednell Nunez is available. All right, we're in a fictitious world where he's out there. Instead of Reed Garrett, it's Dednell Nunez. Okay, and then maybe he pitches the 8th inning. I still think Edwin Diaz would have been ready to go potentially to pitch the 8th inning of this game. And if not, he's coming in the 9th inning. And what did you see in the 8th inning that makes anybody think protecting a clean inning, oh, it's a clean inning? All he needed to do was get 1 out. He didn't come in with bases loaded. He came in with a runner on first and 2 outs. Is that really a worse situation than nobody on and nobody out? What makes anybody think the results would have been different? I'm going to mix in some of these angry emails because this is the worst loss of the year. I don't think anyone's going to dispute that, right? Especially because the West Coast. You had the West Coast, it makes it worse. Sean writes, Edwin Diaz will go down as a failure. Sure, fans love the silly trumpet gimmick, but the reality is Edwin Diaz has been a failure for the Mets. 2022 is an outlier. 2019 cost the playoffs. We talked about that earlier. I can't argue. 2020, he was mid and untrustworthy. 2021, also mid. 2022, elite. 2023, misses season during exhibition injury. 2024, awful, mid at crucial times, suspended for a stretch. The difference between a good GM, David Stearns, and a bad GM, Billy Epler, is a contract like the Edwin Diaz contract. Ridiculous money to a reliever who pitches 1 inning based purely on emotion rather than logic. Should have cut ties after what was a pretty obvious, most effective version of the reliever we'd ever seen. I don't know if I necessarily agree that coming after 2022, they should have just said, all right, see you later. We got the best of you. The Mets they have the financial might to overcome massive, massive contracts, But I do think when you're talking about what he's done here, for being fair, I think those descriptions were pretty damn accurate. And this is the kind of loss, and we'll see how they respond on Thursday afternoon with David Peterson on the mound. This is the kind of loss that buries a season. And I mentioned earlier, this reminds me of 2019. It reminds me of 2019 because of the brutal losses. It reminds me of 2019 because we'll see, but I think they'll end up with a similar win total and miss the postseason. But it also reminds me of 2019 because of some of the most awful, horrible losses the team suffered. Some early in the season, some late in the season. And if you ask any of us which one stuck out the most, it was Edwin Diaz and Kurt Suzuki against the Nationals in early September. Right around this time. Now, how worried am I? I'm very freaking worried. And I said this yesterday when we did the Rico after the win. I'm worried not even because simply the Mets. I'm worried because the Braves don't lose. And math eventually matters. If this is May, if this is June, there's a lot of time. And everything's right in front of you, as Aaron Boone would say. But it is August 30th or August 29th or whatever day you want to call it. There's not a lot of time left, and the Braves never lose, and the Mets are 4 games out. And maybe it'll be 5 games out by the time they get to Chicago. So there's certainly a mathematical worry. And then coming off a loss like this, there's are they going to respond worry, which they've mostly done. But here's the biggest worry. Edwin Diaz. This team ain't winning anything if their closer is going to suck. I'm sorry. Especially with health concerns around the other reliever you trust in Dednell Nunez. Mets have a 1-run lead on Thursday afternoon because David Peterson pitches well. What are they going to do? They're going to go back to Edwin Diaz? Edwin Diaz lost his closer's role earlier this season, went on the Fugazi injured list, came back, got suspended, and then was pretty good for a while. Now what? Now what do you do? Do you simply trust him? The truth is they don't have any other choice. The one thing we could agree on before we all hit the sack is this is the worst loss of the season. We keep changing the list because the Mets keep changing the list. It's not my fault that the list keeps changing. The list keeps changing because the Mets keep changing it. Thank you to Pete Hoffman for waking up. It would have been very frustrating to not have a Rico Brogna after a loss like this. So let's all give Hoff a round of applause. He's a human being. The man works hard. He didn't have to wake up. He could have slept the whole freaking night. Now, he would have never lived it down. That's for damn sure. But thank you to Pete Hoffman. We will have another Rico Brogna. This one will be late, I promise. After the finale of this series, it will not be right after the game. It's a late afternoon game. I'm doing stuff, doing a little vacation stuff. But I would say if people want to chat, kind of like, I don't know if people do this. If you want to like make a schedule, I would probably venture to say you're looking at about 10, 11 o'clock for a Rico reaction to the finale of this 3-game series against the Arizona Diamondbacks. But what a disaster. I'm not going to sleep. I'm going to go watch Brock Lesnar against Kurt Angle main event WrestleMania 19. And then I'll think of that douche center fielder Jake McCarthy and his theme song. Either way, we'll get to more of your emails tomorrow as well. It'll be a more relaxed edition of the Rico Brogna. You can always email us to ricob@gmail.com. I'd love to say something positive to make everybody feel good. But the only thing I could say is we're screwed. And we're screwed because we're Met fans. And we made this bed. So now let's lie in it and go to sleep. Thanks for listening, downloading, subscribing, doing whatever to another edition of Rico Brogna.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Rico Brogna podcast. It's amazing, isn't it? Make sure you download it now to keep it on you at all times.